At 9:16 a.m., Larry and Emil stepped out of a white Chevrolet Celebrity in the north parking lot of the Bank of America on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. They had just taken a phenobarbital, a medication typically used to prevent seizures, but they were using it to calm their nerves. They planned this heist in meticulous detail and sewn watch faces into their gear to time it perfectly. If everything went to plan, they'd be in and out in just 8 minutes. However, just as they were reaching the front door, Larry spotted a patrol car driving past Laurel Canyon. He wasn't sure if the officers had seen him, so he continued with their plan.
We got a 211 in progress at Bank of America, Laurel Canyon. 2 armed suspects, full tactical gear.
While the LAPD made their way to the scene, Larry grabbed a man using an ATM inside the bank, threw him to the floor, and fired into the ceiling. At the same time, Emil shot the lock off the teller's security door and shoved the assistant manager towards the vault. But that's when he ran into an issue. Instead of a single massive vault, the bank had many individual lockboxes, each needing its own separate key. And to make things worse, the cash delivery they thought was scheduled every Friday morning had been randomized to increase security. This would make the heist slower and much less profitable. 3 minutes in, Larry left Emil in the vault and stepped outside the bank. If those cops had seen him coming in, they could be in trouble. When he looked south, he saw them, waiting in the mall across the street. The LAPD was already on their way. This was going to get ugly. 8 minutes in, Emil had managed to stuff his duffel bag with $303,305 and, unknown to him, 3 die packs. On the outside, more than 20 LAPD officers had already taken defensive positions around the bank, covering the entire north and west sides. That's when Larry stepped outside again, raised his AK-47, and opened fire. All of a sudden, a violent gunfight had erupted in the middle of a busy road. The policemen took cover and tried to shoot back. Sometimes they even hit Larry directly, but from over 200 feet away, their 9mm rounds were practically useless against his body armor. Meanwhile, his AK could pierce through cars and even some walls. For 4 straight minutes, Larry stood in the open, spraying hundreds of rounds across Laurel Canyon. Then Emil stepped out to join him. Together, they wounded multiple officers and even some civilians, but eventually, they had to make a run for it. First, Larry made a break to the parking lot while Emil lay down covering fire, and once he found a good position, he did the same. However, moments after Emil stepped outside the bank, the 3 die packs hidden inside his duffel bag exploded, and just as he was nearing the parking lot, an officer managed to graze him with a bullet just above the eye. At this point, 6 news helicopters were hovering above the bank. One of them captured Emil touching his head and leaving a bloody print on the hood of a car. When he told Larry about the die packs, Larry assumed that the money had been stained, and in a snap decision, he left the bag behind. In reality, since the cash was still wrapped in plastic, most of it was fine. But either way, this heist wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. It is unclear why Larry and Emil did not attempt to drive away at this point. They may have thought their escape routes were blocked, or they may have just chosen to fight until the end. But for the next 20 minutes while Emil recovered from his wound, Larry was in a gunfight against hundreds of LAPD officers, all on his own. During this, he was hit at least 3 more times, including once on the side of his torso, where there was a gap in his body armor. And yet, Larry kept on fighting. He was probably too high on adrenaline and phenobarbital to notice. Eventually, Larry ran out of ammunition for his AK, so he ran to their car, picked up the HK-91, and resumed the shooting. While he was close to Emil, Larry tried to tell him something, but he was interrupted by a direct shot to his left arm. Frustrated, Larry started firing at a news helicopter, recording him from afar, but thankfully he missed every shot. The injury had left him unable to hold his rifle properly. Now he had to rest it on his forearm, which ruined his aim. The situation was already bad, but to make it worse, their car now had 2 flat tires from all the shooting. Despite this, Emil started driving off slowly, shooting officers through the window while Larry followed him on the ground. While this was happening, Larry's body armor blocked 3 more shots, but one bullet did strike the front of his HK-91's magazine well, denting it and jamming it beyond repair. When Larry tried to reload, the magazine was stuck. This was the moment that sealed Larry's fate. Now he had to discard the HK-91 and switch to the third AK-47 he had brought. But because it was illegally modified, this weapon was malfunctioning after every few shots. In order to fix it, Larry had to remove and reinsert the magazine every time. Emil was now desperate to escape. He opened the passenger door for Larry to get inside, but for some reason he refused. Larry slammed the door shut and kept using the car for cover while Emil drove beside him. Eventually, they reached the north parking lot's exit and turned into the residential neighborhood east of the bank. Here, there was an abandoned police cruiser and semi-truck, where Larry took cover. Emil stayed on the road, driving slowly and expecting Larry to hop into the car soon, but he had moved to the other side of the truck. Neither one of them could see where the other was. When an officer fired at Emil, he sped toward the front of the semi-truck and didn't find Larry. He had returned to the back, expecting Emil to be there still. But no. Some officers were already inside the neighborhood, and Emil had to speed forward in order to avoid them. From now on, Larry and Emil were completely on their own. At this point, Larry was caught between a semi-truck, a tall wooden fence, and 2 groups of police officers with only a faulty AK-47 and a Beretta M92 FS strapped to his left shoulder. As he kept exchanging fire with police, he was shot twice in the back. One bullet struck his body armor, but the second missed the plating and hit his subclavian artery, causing severe bleeding and some serious pain. Because of this, Larry panicked. When his AK-47 jammed again, instead of simply reinserting the magazine, which would have fixed the issue, he repeatedly pulled the charging handle, jamming a bullet inside and making it impossible to fix. Larry realized he was out of options, and he desperately took cover under the semi-truck. But the police officers had a clear line of sight on him, and they forced him out with 2 more shots. Severely injured, losing blood, and likely demoralized, Larry crawled out from under the truck, pulled his Beretta from his shoulder holster, and fired one-handed at police. But the officers returned fire and hit Larry's hand, causing him to drop the gun. It was over. While this was happening, LA's SWAT team arrived on the scene and began commandeering police vehicles to look for Emil. He was deep inside the neighborhood, driving a Chevrolet Celebrity with 2 flat tires and a leaky gas tank. Going back for Larry was simply not an option anymore. But if Emil wanted to escape, he needed a new vehicle. While finding his way through the neighborhood, Emil forced a car to stop in front of him. But the driver, seeing a masked juggernaut emerging from a bullet-ridden car, understandably kept backing up. When Emil pointed his AK at him, he turned around and sped away. Emil stayed on the move, looking for other vehicles. And this time, when he came across a pickup truck, he didn't negotiate. Instead, he fired his AK through their 2 windshields, breaking glass into the driver's face and grazing his head with a bullet. Thankfully, the driver reacted quickly and abandoned the truck in the middle of the road, with the door open. Immediately, Emil parked his Chevy beside it, tossed his remaining gear on the bed, and climbed into the driver's seat. But when he tried to start the car, he couldn't. The driver had taken out the keys from the ignition, so he crouched down and tried to jump-start it. While he was doing this, though, Emil was spotted by a SWAT team, who parked right beside him. Emil jumped out of the truck just in time, seconds before bullets started tearing through the driver's seat. He took cover again behind the Chevy and began spraying the SWAT team with bullets. Whenever they found a moment to fire back, his body armor kept him safe. This went on for the next 2.5 minutes, but eventually Emil ran out of ammunition for his AK-47, so he had to take a few seconds to grab his XM15 dissipator from the back of the pickup truck. This gave the SWAT team a few moments to breathe, and one of the officers noticed a gap between the tires of the 3 vehicles. He had an angle on Emil's legs, and they were unprotected. When Emil started firing again, the officer laid down on the ground and took a precise shot, hitting Emil in the calf. Then he took another one, and another one. Emil had taken multiple direct hits to the legs, but he was still fighting back. In fact, he laid down on the ground himself and started shooting the SWAT team too. But this was his final mistake, because immediately, a bullet struck his arm and he dropped his XM15. Now unarmed, Emil raised his hands and surrendered. Unfortunately, for a few moments, the SWAT officers were behind cover and unaware that Emil had surrendered. So they continued firing, hitting his legs several more times. Eventually, though, they ceased fire and put Emil on his stomach. Concerned that Emil might have a bomb or another weapon, one officer pressed his rifle against the back of Emil's head to prevent him from moving. The front of the barrel was so hot from all the firing that it seared Emil's skin. Leery was dead, and now Emil was finally in handcuffs. But the LAPD had received over 17 calls of different incidents from within the neighborhood. So at this point, they suspected that a third gunman was still at large. Because of this, officers refused to move Emil. And even when a group of medics got to the scene, the officers told them to go away. And so Emil stayed there, in the middle of the road, with barbiturates in his system, thinning his blood. After 56 minutes, he bled out because of the bullet wounds in his legs. The area remained on lockdown until the LAPD concluded that there was never a third gunman. At 11:30 p.m., North Hollywood shootout came to an end.